Today I'll be going over Chapter 4 of Nancy Rooks' book, Inside Graceland. Chapter 4 is titled Memories. Nancy says that although Elvis's life was anything but typical, there was still a consistent familiar routine that developed over the years at Graceland. She writes, "It was a home, not just a business. While financial and business decisions were made on a daily basis, Elvis wanted to be himself, to be able to relax and unwind at Graceland. It was his escape from the many cares of the world. Just like anyone else wanting to unwind, he enjoyed lounging in his pajamas during the day, relaxing upstairs while reading or watching TV, or eating breakfast in the dining room. One time he told Nancy, 'I don't want to be treated like a star in my own home.' She said, 'Okay, I'll treat you like you're my brother.' This relaxed and informal atmosphere was what Elvis preferred, and it made their interactions more comfortable and natural. She says he spent his time doing ordinary activities much like anyone else at home. She says, "When I first went to work for him, he would sometimes sit for hours in the TV room in the basement and listen to records. He would occasionally play his own records, but most often he preferred to listen to black singers such as Fats Domino, Memphis Slim, Rufus Thomas, and B.B. King. Frank Sinatra and Tom Jones albums were also frequently played. I used to love to hear those records coming over the intercom as I worked. It seemed to make the day go by so much faster." Elvis was an avid television watcher, and he had TV sets placed throughout the house. In his bedroom, he even had 2 televisions mounted in the ceiling above his bed and a third console set at the foot of the bed, which allowed him to watch all 3 major networks simultaneously. With his remote, he could switch the audio to whichever channel interested him most. One of the bedroom televisions was typically left on all day and night, usually with the sound muted. That's how much he loved television. Some of Elvis's favorite shows were Kojak, Wild Wild West, Hawaii Five-0, and several of the game shows that were popular at the time. And he loved football. He'd watch the games whenever they were on. His favorite team? The Los Angeles Rams. She says that Elvis enjoyed watching a local Sunday morning gospel program called the Otis Mays Show. The host, Otis, was a famous local black entertainer, and Elvis would often joke that one day he would go down to the studio and join the show himself. He knew, and everyone else knew, that that would stir chaos, so he never followed through. Nancy writes, "He told me on numerous occasions how much he enjoyed many of the black musicians and said he had grown up trying to imitate their musical style. I'm often asked if I ever saw any signs of prejudice in him. I can honestly say that I never did. He never let the color of someone's skin affect the way he treated them. Many of his fans would probably be surprised to know, for example, that in the mid-70s he dated a young, beautiful, light-skinned black girl named Maggie. She had been hired by Vernon for $5 an hour to answer the phones at Graceland, and she and Elvis soon developed a romantic attraction. Like many of Elvis's romances, this one was relatively short and they went their separate ways. Tragically, she later died in a nightclub party." Nancy says that although life at Graceland was often lively and unpredictable, there were also quiet, ordinary moments. Elvis enjoyed reading and would sometimes sit peacefully in his pajamas going through the local newspaper, and they also had subscriptions to Life, Time, and Newsweek. During the hot Memphis days, Elvis would spend hours relaxing by the pool, and it was often Nancy's responsibility to make sure everything he needed was set up and ready for him there. Hawaiian Tropic tanning lotion, 2 large beach towels, plenty of ice water, and cotton balls to cover his eyes. And she always had chips and sandwiches out for him too, and sometimes he'd have her set up a small fan next to his lounging chair. She can still picture him there now. In the early 1970s, a privacy fence was installed around the pool to prevent neighbors from peering in while he swam or relaxed. Neighbors often tried to catch a glimpse of him, but for reasons she never fully understood, the fence was later taken down. Elvis's normal route to the pool would be to walk through the music room, down the trophy room hallway, and out the door at the end of the trophy room to the pool. Nancy writes, "He was very hot-natured and liked everything around him to be as cold as possible. He had a window air conditioning unit installed right next to his bed so he could feel the cold air blowing directly over him. It also provided a little bit of noise to help him when he slept. There used to be a second window unit at the other end of the house in his dressing room. It was taken out before the house was opened for tours. The one in his bedroom used to be visible on the tour, but has since been taken out of the window. The one in his bedroom ran all the time, even in the winter. Nancy says winters at Graceland were especially joyful because of the Christmas celebrations. Elvis embraced the season enthusiastically and had decorations going up around Thanksgiving. The yardmen decorated the property extensively, lining the front driveway with lights and placing lighted trees throughout the grounds. A lighted nativity scene with animals and angels was set up in front, along with reindeer statues, transforming the estate into a festive holiday display. Inside the house, the downstairs was filled with Christmas decorations, lights, ornaments, and wreaths everywhere. A green lighted wreath was draped along the stairway railing, and a large, beautifully decorated tree was always placed in the dining room position directly behind Elvis's chair. By Christmas Day, the dining room would be overflowing with wrapped presents, so many that it was sometimes difficult to even reach the tree. She says gifts poured in from around the world, often in overwhelming numbers. At times, Elvis allowed the staff to choose items they liked, and many of the stuffed animals, especially those Lisa didn't keep, were donated to local children's hospitals. Elvis would sometimes dress as Santa Claus for Lisa, while other years Vernon took on the role. Lisa was so excited about Christmas that she sometimes began opening up her presents days before Christmas arrived. They tried to stop her, but when Elvis found out, he would laugh and say, "She's only going to be a kid one time. Just let her go ahead," Nancy writes. Christmas time also meant tons of fireworks set up in the backyard at all hours of the day and night. Elvis one time sent one of his buddies to Arkansas with $1,000 just for fireworks. I don't think anyone in Whitehaven got any sleep that night. There would also be many parties at the house for friends and family alike. The punch and the alcohol would flow freely, and everyone had a great time. Though he didn't drink, he would sometimes have to tell some of the employees to be careful not to drink too much. He would laugh and say, "I need you at work tomorrow." She says Christmas also brought gifts for the employees. Vernon traditionally distributed hams, while Elvis would arrange for department stores to open late at night so he could shop privately. Over the years, she received many thoughtful presents along with generous cash bonuses. The most meaningful gift Elvis ever gave her was in 1976, the last Christmas of his life. It was a gold leaf Bible, and she treasures it deeply, knowing it was a gift from his heart. Christmas decorations remained up until after Elvis's birthday in January. She says taking them down was always bittersweet because it marked the end of the festive season and a return to the ordinary day-to-day routines of the mansion. Nancy writes, "As his housekeeper, I cleaned his room every day. I changed his sheets and all 4 pillowcases on a daily basis. He had several sets of the custom-made linens, most of them plain white. Contrary to what people think, he didn't have monogrammed sheets or pillowcases. He occasionally through the years had bedspreads with his initials on them. The bed linens were kept in a small closet next to his bed near the window air conditioning unit. He also had a number of sets of matching towels and washcloths, with red being his favorite. As for his laundry, Elvis would leave his dirty clothes on a chair in the corner of his bedroom, and Nancy would gather them and take them to the basement laundry room where they were washed using ordinary Tide detergent. Elvis frequently ate in his bedroom, sitting in bed while watching TV or reading. His meals were served on his favorite white TV tray, and he drank ice water from an orange juice-style pitcher kept in an upstairs refrigerator. When he finished, he would leave his tray beside the bed for her to pick up and return to the kitchen. Nancy writes, "There is a small hallway leading from his bedroom into the bathroom with a closet on either side. The one on the left held his pajamas, robes, and slippers. Elvis did not wear t-shirts, and the most famous entertainer in the world wore plain white Fruit of the Loom briefs. They were kept in a white chest of drawers in his dressing room along with his socks. The closet to the right of the small hallway held a small dorm-style refrigerator. That's where we kept popsicles, Eskimo pies, cut up fruit, and such. We also kept a bottle of ice water in it for him at all times." Aunt Delta typically handled the household shopping and was often seen buying supplies at the Kroger in Whitehaven Plaza or at the nearby Walgreens close to Graceland. She bought Elvis's toiletries, including Colgate toothpaste and Aqua Velva and Brute aftershave. Nancy personally disliked the scent of Brute and sometimes tried to hide it in the bathroom shelf, but Elvis would always find it and continue wearing it. Elvis wasn't a heavy smoker, but he occasionally enjoyed a cigar, and he was often seen holding an unlit Tipperillo. He would sometimes smoke cigarettes as well, but avoided being seen doing so in public because he felt it didn't look good for his image. Nancy writes, as every true fan of Elvis knows, there are many stories concerning his eating habits. As one of his cooks, I never quite knew what kind of food Elvis might be in the mood for. Although he preferred plain Southern style food, like most of us, he would sometimes get a craving for something different. Not necessarily different as in something unique that nobody else likes, but different in the fact that he may want breakfast at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or dessert at 3 in the morning. He might ask for a hot dog with sauerkraut at midnight. This necessitated us trying to always keep the refrigerators and pantries stocked in anticipation of what he might ask for. And of course, we were also expected to feed anyone else at any time of the day if they were hungry. One of his buddies loved to come in the kitchen and ask us to fry up a pound of bacon for him, which we always did. That same man got so large that at one time in the back pasture area, a horse he was attempting to get on actually fell over on him. In the late 60s, Aunt Delta once told me that she was spending over $500 a week on food. I think we all know who that buddy is. Each January for his birthday, they baked him a large homemade sheet cake decorated with a musical note. The cake would be brought into the dining room as everyone sang, and Elvis would blow out the candles while those gathered around him cheered. While many food-related moments were enjoyable, there were also difficult times. Most of the time, she says Elvis was easygoing, but as he became more reliant on his medications, he could grow more particular and demanding, sometimes sending meals back because they weren't hot enough and asking for them to be prepared again. Nancy remembers a specific incident when Elvis believed he was using the intercom to let them know he was ready for his meal. However, he had accidentally buzzed the wrong station, so they never received the message. After 20 minutes of believing they were ignoring his call, he stormed down the back stairs into the kitchen, only to find them gathered there puzzled about why he hadn't called them to bring him his meal yet. Nancy writes, we heard him from the top of the stairs, and by the time he got down to the kitchen area, most of us had scrambled for safety. I ducked into the stairway leading down into the basement, and luckily he did not see me. I remember watching Mary go running out the back door into the yard. Charging into the kitchen, Elvis was as mad as I'd ever seen him. He was furious. He was raging mad. I heard a crash, which I later learned was where he picked up the chair sitting at the end of the counter and crashed it against the wall, knocking one of the telephones completely off the wall. Elvis shouted, when I ask for my meal, I want it now. Seeing the startled faces of those still in the kitchen, he turned and went back upstairs. Once they assured him his meal would be sent up immediately. Nancy was the lucky, quote, lucky one to take his meal up. And by then he had settled down. She explained to him that they never received his call and he was not intentionally ignored. Nancy writes, he immediately apologized to me and shortly after finishing his meal, came downstairs and apologized to the others who had been there. We all knew it had not been him, but the effects of the medication that had caused the outburst. And typical of Elvis, we could tell for the next day or so he really regretted having acted that way in front of all of us. Elvis liked to play practical jokes on people, Nancy included, more times than she'd like to remember. One day while making up Charlie Hodge's bed in the basement, she was absent-mindedly humming when she heard Elvis in the next room. Suddenly she caught a glimpse of his hand briefly appearing and disappearing at the doorway. Then she heard him yell, "Duck!" as a small firecracker came flying her way and exploded 10 feet away from her. Nancy says, I jumped and screamed all at the same time. I'm not sure what I said, but it was enough for Elvis to come into the room and apologize to me as best he could, considering the fact that he was laughing so hard that he fell into Charlie's bed. Before long, I was laughing too. Elvis loved setting off fireworks, and he would have one of his guys drive across the Arkansas state line to purchase large quantities for special holiday celebrations. He would sometimes impulsively decide to, quote, play war with fireworks, turning it into a playful battle. For those who didn't want to participate, it was a cue to quickly find a safe place indoors to avoid getting hit. During one of their fireworks war games, a Roman candle went off course and shot through a den window. It lit the drapes and caused a small fire inside the room. Vernon was sitting in the den at the time. Startled and upset, he sprang into action, saying a few choice words about how his son was going to kill everyone. Vernon started stamping out the flames while shouting for Nancy to bring a hose. She quickly grabbed the first one she saw from the lawn, rushed it inside to him, and then ran back out to turn on the water. But she heard Vernon screaming even louder, and when she ran back inside, she saw that she grabbed the sprinkler hose, one that had small holes in the hose to water small beds of flowers. Vernon got the fire out eventually with the correct type of hose, and she got an education that day about different types of hoses. There was another fireworks incident when Elvis and his friends began shooting fireworks at one another in the backyard. One stray Roman candle struck the back of the jungle room, creating a loud explosion that startled everyone inside. Seeing smoke near their air conditioning units, the guys quickly sprayed the area with a hose until the smoke cleared. Believing the situation was under control, they resumed their playful battle for several more hours before finally ending it. Nancy writes, later that evening, they all decided to go out for the night, leaving the rest of us at the house doing our usual routines. Sometime around midnight, someone came rushing inside screaming that there were flames shooting out of the outside wall around the air conditioning unit. We all rushed outside, and sure enough, the entire area was practically engulfed in flames. Luckily, George Coleman was at the house doing some electrical work and was able to get the flames under control. To be on the safe side, however, it was determined that we probably needed to have the fire department come out and make sure the fire was not smoldering under the wallboard. Shortly afterward, numerous fire trucks arrived with lights flashing, illuminating the entire back area of Graceland. The firefighters carefully inspected the scene and, after several minutes, confirmed that George's quick actions had successfully resolved the issue. The next morning, Elvis walked into the kitchen and saw George at the counter drinking coffee. Elvis said, "So, I hear you guys had a little excitement last night." And he never spoke about it again. Nancy says, "Just another interesting evening at the Presley residence." One day while Nancy was cleaning Priscilla's upstairs bathroom near Elvis's office, he came in and sat at his desk to work. Apparently not in the mood to continue, he called for her into the office and said, "Nancy, come over here and sing with me." Nancy writes, "Before going on with this story, I must tell you that it finally became, after some time, fairly routine and comfortable for me, Nancy Rooks, to sing along with the Elvis Presley. It happened on such a regular basis, along with any other person who might be around when he wanted to sing and didn't want to do it alone, that I finally did become fairly comfortable with it. Amazing, but true." Elvis sat at the piano and invited her to stand beside him as he played and sang, "Precious Lord, Take My Hand." She joined in and they finished the song together. He then began another song, she doesn't remember which one, but partway through they both forgot the lyrics at the same moment and couldn't remember how it continued. After laughing about forgetting the lyrics, Elvis began humming the parts he couldn't remember and singing the lines he did. She joined him in the same way, and together they alternated between singing and humming, piecing the song together as best they could. Charlie walked into the room and asked, "What in the world are you two doing?" Elvis said, "What do you think we're doing? We're singing." And Charlie thought a second and then said, "Well, you're killing that song." Nancy says Elvis had a well-known fascination with guns and would sometimes use them impulsively, even in relatively minor situations. One day, a maintenance worker casually mentioned spotting a small snake in a tree near the house. Elvis immediately decided to investigate, and expecting one of his typical dramatic solutions, she and others followed him outside to watch what would happen. Nancy writes, "He went over to the tree and, apparently getting a quick glance at the snake, yelled, 'Nancy, go get me a gun.' Accustomed as I was to these types of things by now, I casually asked, 'Which gun, Mr. Elvis?' He laughed and said, 'Any gun, I don't care. Just hurry before the snake gets away.' I rushed inside, ran upstairs to his office, and grabbed a long-barreled gun of some type from his gun case and rushed it back outside to him. By that time, I'm sure that little snake was probably in Mississippi, but having perceived that Graceland was being overrun by snakes, Elvis grabbed the gun, warned everybody to stand back, and then blasted the tree full of holes with a deafening roar. I can only imagine what the usual group of fans idling around the front gate that day must have thought. Then, with the barrel smoking like in one of his Western movies, he laughed, told everyone it was safe to be on the grounds of Graceland again, and calmly walked back into the mansion, confident that at least that snake, which of course he never hit, would never be back again. Another routine pest problem taken care of at Graceland. She says that in the late 1960s, small green or garter snakes were occasionally found in the basement. In fact, Dodger became so frightened of encountering one that she eventually refused to go downstairs at all. Nancy herself once killed a small green snake at the bottom of the stairs near the jungle room. She used a metal rod from the laundry room, and she says that such encounters weren't entirely surprising, since the basement had originally been an unfinished open space with window openings before Elvis had it renovated. Maintenance eventually covered up all the holes to put a stop to the snakes coming into the house, but it didn't matter to Dodger. As far as Nancy knows, Dodger never stepped foot down there again. Nancy says, going back to guns at Graceland, I remember another time I was busily involved in doing something in the kitchen when all of a sudden I heard a very loud pop in the other room. Thinking it was too loud to be a firecracker, I went running into the foyer, which is located just beneath his upstairs bathroom, in time to see a fine mist of sheetrock dust, followed by a stream at first, and then a deluge of water pouring from the ceiling near the front door above the foyer. I ran down the hallway to a small closet where we kept table linens and such, and grabbed an armful of whatever was there and went back and threw them on the floor to try and help absorb the water. She ran upstairs yelling, "Mr. Elvis, are you okay?" She found him standing in the bathroom still in his pajamas and holding a smoking gun in his hand. He had a sheepish grin on his face. She looked at the toilet, which was shattered with a million pieces all over the place, and asked what happened. Elvis grinned and muttered something about never liking the toilet anyway, and then walked back to his bedroom where he lay on his bed and watched TV. Nancy never found out what happened to cause him to shoot the toilet. Nancy says that Aunt Delta quickly handled the situation by sending Mike McGregor and Earl Pritchett to a local plumbing supply store to purchase a new black commode, which they installed as if nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. She says, you can still barely see where the repair was made in the ceiling of the foyer as you first walk in the front door. Look up and slightly to the right, near the entrance going into the living room. Nancy writes, then there was the time that Elvis decided Priscilla needed to learn how to shoot a gun. I don't think she had ever fired one before, but that didn't matter to Elvis. When he decided something needed to be done, it needed to be done right then and there. He assured Priscilla, who was a little apprehensive about firearms to begin with, that it was an easy thing to learn and that he could make her an expert marksman in no time. Elvis and the guys often used the old well house behind the office as an informal shooting range. To make it safer, Earl Pritchett and Mike McGregor secured several large telephone poles together just inside the doorway to serve as a backstop for target practice. They would set up paper targets against the stacked telephone poles and then begin their target practice inside the well house. Elvis and about 10 of his friends gathered several guns and set them on a table in the backyard behind the jungle room. Priscilla, somewhat nervous, stood nearby while Nancy and the rest of them formed a cheering line stretching from the office to the house. Then they began their informal shooting display. Elvis tried out several guns at the well house target before choosing what he thought was the right one for Priscilla. He handed her a long-barreled .45. When he handed it to her, she nearly dropped it because of its weight, which in hindsight should have been a warning for everyone to step back. After switching to a lighter firearm that better suited Priscilla's hand, Elvis carefully coached her, showing her how to grip it properly, how to aim, and squeeze the trigger slowly to avoid recoil. Nancy writes, having said all that, Priscilla pointed the gun toward the target, closed both eyes, jerked on the trigger, and sent a ricochet of brick flying towards all of us as her bullet completely missed the door to the well house and hit about 3 feet to the left of it. It would not have been too bad if she had only fired one shot, but she must have gone into a panic because she kept pulling the trigger, spraying the entire wall area, and again showering anyone within about 30 feet of where she was with brick particles. It was like a mass stampede as everyone scrambled back toward the house, trying to get out of the way of any future surprises. Elvis quickly took the gun from Priscilla's hand, and after a tense moment of stunned silence, everyone broke into applause and laughter once they realized no one had been hurt. She says although Priscilla eventually became more skilled with the handgun, she first left plenty of stray bullet holes in the old well house. Nancy can still picture it now. Priscilla firing while Red West stood behind her, yelling, 10 feet to the right. Fun fact, she says, you can still see some of the missing chunks of brick and concrete that have long been painted over as you exit the well house on the tour. Just turn around and look above the doorway as you exit the building. Nancy says Elvis loved animals, and there were usually a number of animals around. Elvis once kept a peacock that roamed freely around the backyard and grounds. He was very protective of it and constantly reminded everyone to drive carefully around the back lot and the carport to make sure the bird was never accidentally harmed. He really cared about the peacock. That is, until the peacock, seeing its reflection in one of Elvis's favorite cars, did major damage to the paint by pecking at its reflection. That bird was quickly given away, and Elvis spent a lot of money getting the car repaired. Over time, Elvis would have mules, mynah birds, pigs, goats, chickens, turkeys, and the usual assortment of dogs. There were a lot of dogs over the years. Nancy writes, there was one named Muffin. He loved to chew your shoes up. One time a lady was visiting with Aunt Delta and sitting at the kitchen counter. Without thinking, she slipped her shoes off while sitting on the chair. When she went to leave, she looked down and screamed. I went running over to see what had happened, and there at her feet were the chewed remains of what had been a very expensive pair of alligator shoes. Elvis, of course, ended up buying her a new pair. Another dog named Stuff would try and take Aunt Delta's pocketbooks away from her whenever they entered the house. Then there was Babby, a beautiful collie. She did not like men and would growl at any man that walked by. Not women, just men. Elvis bought 2 sheepdogs and we could never keep them clean. One of his 2 Great Danes cornered me in the basement one day, and I had to call for Aunt Delta to come and get me out of there. The dog stories went on and on. There were 2 roosters on the property that would sometimes fight so fiercely that they injured each other. She and Aunt Delta would step in with sticks to separate them and stop the fights. Interestingly enough, there were rarely many cats around. The only ones that she recalls were occasional strays from the neighborhood or cats coming from the barn in the back. The staff always found good homes for them. Aunt Delta would have Nancy buy cat cages from Sears so that they could catch the stray cats and find homes for them. Nancy personally took several to her mother's small farm in the country where they helped control the mice in the barn. But after the 8th or 9th cat, her mom politely declined any more. The only true cat that was welcomed at Graceland belonged to Lisa after she moved to Los Angeles with Priscilla. Lisa would put the small cat in a handbag and sneak it on commercial flights back to Memphis for visits. This happened in the days before the strict airport security, and Nancy wonders what might have happened had the cat been discovered. There was also a monkey named J-Hug who was kept in a cage in the backyard. They fed him fruit and milk, but sometimes he escaped and would grab Nancy around the ankles, forcing her to call for help. She admits she was relieved when Elvis eventually got rid of the monkey. Nancy writes, and then, of course, there was Scatter, the notoriously famous chimp. To say he was a handful would be putting it mildly. We never knew what he was going to do. I honestly believe he thought he was human. He drank like a sailor and could always be counted on to do whatever he could to make our lives miserable. Elvis ended up having a small pen built in the backyard for him, complete with a heater and a window air conditioning unit. We were all afraid to be around him. He would grab for you as you walked by or frighten you with a loud shrieking noise when you least expected it. We all had to take turns feeding him while he was locked in the pen, and we all dreaded it. I watched him pull a wig off one of the other maids as she tried to feed him one day. She began to scream, and as she ran toward the house, slipped and fell in the mud. We finally got her calmed down and cleaned up, but she would never go near the pen again. Then Elvis decided to get horses, starting with one for himself and one for Priscilla, and soon many people around them had horses as well. He even bought a small pony for Lisa Marie when she was young, which later became a memorable, though unpleasant, experience for Nancy. Nancy saw Elvis outside the jungle room window leading the pony around the backyard while Lisa rode on its back. She noticed them while doing housework, but didn't think much of it at the time. A few minutes later, the back door to the jungle room opened and Elvis walked in grinning, leading the pony inside with Lisa still riding on its back. Elvis said, "Let's show Dodger your new pony." They walked past Nancy and through the small opening under the stairs, across the hall, and right into Dodger's room. Nancy followed behind them at a safe distance and into Dodger's room where Dodger was seated in her rocking chair. When Dodger saw the horse, "Lord, son, what are you doing?" Elvis and Lisa were giggling. Dodger got up and said, "Son, get that animal out of here. It doesn't belong in the house." Nancy writes, Elvis then began leading the pony back through the house. As it got to the large entryway between the kitchen and the jungle room, right before the 2 steps leading down into the den, it did what comes naturally to a pony, right on the carpet. And you can guess who got to clean it up. The cleanup required a newspaper and an entire roll of paper towels, which were promptly thrown away in the trash bin outside. Elvis never brought a horse in the house again. Nancy says Elvis's horse, Rising Sun, was widely admired for its beauty, But she personally was afraid of it. She had heard stories that the horse had bitten people before, so she was always nervous around it. And she says not a lot of people realize how big the horse really was. He was very large and tall. Nancy writes, one lady had her ear bitten pretty severely by Rising Sun, but in all fairness to Rising Sun, she had brought it on herself. She had been putting her face in front of the horse, trying to get the horse to give her a kiss. She got a kiss, all right. One early afternoon, Elvis sent Nancy to Vernon's house on Dolan Street to retrieve something. To get there, she walked through the back pasture along the fence and entered Vernon's property through the back gate. On her way back through the pasture, Rising Sun suddenly charged toward her at full gallop. Frightened, she quickly turned around, ran back through the gate onto Vernon's property, and rushed towards the house. Nancy writes, I was so scared that Vernon called Aunt Delta, who walked over and met me and escorted me back to Graceland. I saw Rising Sun a few hundred feet away, just standing in the middle of the pasture looking at me. I couldn't prove it, but I think he was smiling. Nancy says many fans are unaware that after Rising Sun died, he was buried in the back pasture near the large barn in the back corner of the property. Lisa's pony was buried next to him in 1993. Nancy says it took a lot of people to keep Graceland running. There were yardmen, contractors, electricians, painters, carpenters, maids, cooks, secretaries, security guards, animal keepers, and general maintenance people on duty constantly. She says finding reliable employees was often difficult, which is why Elvis frequently hired relatives to work for him, believing that he could trust them. Even so, staffing was constantly changing, with people often being hired and fired. Just as the staff would be getting used to someone working there, that person would often be gone, fired, or leaving for various reasons. Positions like groundskeepers and security guards were especially difficult to keep filled. She remembers 2 yard workers once persuaded Vernon to allow grapevines to be planted near the pool as aesthetic landscaping. But it was later discovered that they were using the grapes to make wine, and Vernon quickly fired them both. Another time, a new security guard at the front gate was persuaded by a couple claiming to be, quote, long-lost family members, and he allowed them onto the property. The couple walked up to the front porch, entered the house, and even went upstairs into Elvis's bedroom, who was in Hollywood at the time filming a movie. Luckily, Aunt Delta went upstairs and found them. She called security, and the 2 were removed from the property. Fortunately, they didn't steal anything, but the guard was immediately fired. Nancy writes, yet another security guard was fired after he was discovered exposing himself to Lisa and several of her friends out by the barn in the back pasture. Vernon did not tell Elvis what had happened out of fear for what Elvis would have done to the man. Could you imagine what Elvis would have done to this disgusting person? Nancy says several years after Elvis's death, another serious security breach occurred. One evening while she was tidying up in the trophy room, Aunt Delta and another maid suddenly ran in screaming. They were clearly frightened by something that had happened, and Nancy saw that Aunt Delta was holding the pistol that she normally kept in her nightstand. Nancy says the maid immediately locked the door, and Aunt Delta got on the phone and called security. Nancy writes, I was to learn that the 2 of them had been watching TV in the jungle room when, without warning, a crazed man, who we later found out was high on drugs, crashed his way into the room by breaking out one of the back windows. He had used something like a crowbar to force the bars off the outside of the window and smashed through the glass while the 2 women were watching their show. They had then scrambled into Aunt Delta's bedroom, located right off the kitchen. The man followed them into the bedroom where Aunt Delta had grabbed the gun from her nightstand drawer and threatened to shoot him. The other maid later told Nancy that Aunt Delta's hand was shaking when she pointed the gun at the man, and she was screaming, I'll kill you if you don't get out of here. The man pleaded with Aunt Delta to shoot him. Aunt Delta and the maid were able to somehow dart around the deranged man and ran out the back door and into the trophy room. Eventually, security and law enforcement showed up, and Nancy heard later that the man was sent to a mental institution. There was only one other time while working at Graceland that truly frightened Nancy. It occurred several years after the break-in and also happened near the trophy room. One evening while cleaning near the pool area, she walked toward the back entrance of the jungle room and stopped to use the restroom behind the house. The same restroom that tour guests use near the trophy room. When she went inside and closed the door, she didn't notice anything unusual at first. Nancy writes, I was only in there for several minutes, and as I came out, I immediately spotted some large lettering which had been spray painted on the outside wall. It was just a few obscene words, but it was enough to scare me half to death. The police were called and the grounds were gone over with a fine-tooth comb, but no intruders were found, and we never figured out what the motivation had been or what it had meant. It did leave me visibly shaken for a while, however. After those incidents, more guards were hired, especially at night, to patrol the grounds on a regular basis. It took me a long time before I felt totally comfortable after that. She says most of her memories were positive, though. Elvis and his family were warm and caring, and she says she was treated like part of the family rather than just an employee, and that Elvis was always a perfect gentleman who made her feel safe and comfortable around him. One day, Nancy's daughter badly sprained her foot, and Nancy tried to schedule an appointment with a nearby foot doctor that Elvis used. However, the office told her the doctor was too busy to see her. Elvis found out what happened, so he called the doctor's office, and after a brief conversation, he hung up and told her that the doctor was waiting to see your daughter right now. He even paid for it. One evening when Nancy's car was in the shop, her husband came to pick her up after work. Elvis came outside and struck up a conversation with her husband, and before long, the two of them were in the backyard casually tossing a football back and forth. She happily sat and watched them for over an hour. She says, "That's the kind of man Elvis was. Those are the kinds of memories I will always remember." Nancy adds, "There are always going to be a few small flaws in someone's personality, and sometimes a little darkness can slip into their life. Given the tremendous stresses that Elvis endured, however, and the dependence he was forced to rely on with prescription medications to keep him going, to get him up in the morning, to get him to sleep at night, to get him up for all the grueling performances, I have often marveled that he did as well as he did. A lesser man would have never survived as long as he did, and would have never continued to give his all to his adoring fans in the same fashion that Elvis did. Those are the memories that I have." That's it for chapter 4. Stay tuned for chapter 5, which is titled Lisa Marie. See you then.